Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friends of the Forest. I'm your host, Sarah.
And I'm your host, Brad.
And we are back once again for Andor April. Because it is April, we are talking about Andor. Therefore, that makes this episode part of Andor April. Are you surprised? Good. All right. That was the preschooler, like, do you want to know? Exactly, the Dora pause.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you know how many times we've watched Andor? That's right. 40.
Exactly. 40. 8,000. Anyway, we are back today to talk about, just to be honest with you, we were thinking about topics for Andor April and what we could tackle. And we were like, the artistry of Andor. We're gonna talk about the music, the costumes, the set, the writing, the direction, and then we were like, that's 8,000 things. That's too many things for two people to manage. And also, we talk about some of these other things in our recap episodes. So, like, we get a little bit of the writing and the performances in our conversations about the episodes, whether those be from 2022 or our Andor Again rewatch on Patreon or on our ranking episode from season 1. And we talk about elements of this show. So I didn't think we needed to go through all of it. So we narrowed it down to talking about the visual language and the visual artistry of Andor between the costumes and the set design and decoration. And I thought that these would be good topics to just kind of hone in on, because we talk so much about the characters of the show and what they're saying and what they're doing. And we talk a little bit less about the spaces in which they inhabit and how they move in those spaces. And so I thought that would be, just an interesting thing to really hone in on, especially as we move into season 2, where we know that things are going to get more intense. And as we get closer to, BBY, literally BBY, one day BBY, and then the Battle of Yavin and things changing. So we're close to this Imperial machine that we know by the time of the original trilogy. So yeah. What were your thoughts, Brad, when we were kind of coming up with this topic and what we could talk about? And is there anything that like sticks out to you when you think about artistry of Andor, even if it's beyond what we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, first off, I would say like you starting with a big scope, talking about the big scope and then narrowing in. That's like the most us dynamic.
You're right.
It's a listener who can you guess plays each of those roles, right? I feel like oftentimes I'm like the one that's like, let's throw it all in. And you're like, Brad,
we're going to be here for years.
Yeah, Brad, we're going to be here for 6 hours. Let's roll it back. Like I'm the George and you're like the Rick McCallum. I feel like you're like, George, we can't do that.
We can't do that. But it's a good dynamic for us to be in.
It's a healthy
Because,
balance. Yeah.
Right. And like, we'd love to have conversations about Star Wars, both on and off of a recorded format. And when we're off the recorded format, we can talk for 6 hours or whatever, because we can move around. We're on FaceTime. It's like I'm walking through my house as we're having a conversation. You can't do that so much when we're at the microphone. So that in itself has some limitations to it. But I think over the years of podcasting, we've kind of figured out what works for us and isn't mentally draining, because sometimes it can be tough. So hopefully we've achieved that in kind of focusing on the costumes and the sets and not everything else, despite how wonderful everything else is too.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I think like on this topic, speaking more so to like costuming and set design environments, like I think oftentimes we're just so engrossed in the world of Star Wars that, because of those things, right? Because of how it feels and how it looks when we move through these environments. Like you said, yes, the performances are important, but we have to be grounded to believe that we're there with that character and believing what they're saying and believing and making this universe feel authentic. So it's just so important. And I feel like something with Andor and what makes it so prestigious and puts it in that kind of prestige category is like, are these elements? Because I'm not going to crap or poo-poo on anything else in Star Wars, but there has been like a heavier reliance on stagecraft, right? In like the last couple of years. And I think to some degree, you kind of lose a little bit of that lived in kind of rugged sort of feel with with projects where it's like you don't get that same feeling as you would with a on location.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because obviously digital innovation is at the core of what Star Wars is all about in so many ways. Like the prequels exist because of digital innovation, and their look exists because of digital innovation. And so we see that a lot in other Star Wars shows with the volume and with other emerging awesome, like really cool and really innovative technologies like the volume that allow environments to be created a little bit differently. And still have a similar effect. But I agree with you. I think that there's a particular granularity, a particular texture to a space that that exists in full, or exists as much as possible in the real world. And again, genuinely, this is not a space where we're here to speak poorly about CGI, speak poorly about the volume or any of those things, because they're so valuable and they're part of every show, including Andor. And the artists who create these things are incredible artists too. We just really wanted to highlight, with this show, and they talked about it too. They talked about how they did this show as much impractical as possible. And that was important to them. So I think it's worth pointing out in this space too.
Yeah, there is a quote from a Fast Company article about the triumph of cinematic world building in Andor. And there was a quote from visual effects producer TJ Falls on Andor where he said, quote, "There's a number of different ways that you can approach effects in any particular show. And it was very instrumental in Tony's vision from the very beginning that he wanted it very grounded. He wanted it very real." So I think, and yeah, to your point, like these tools that we have, these digital tools are used in everything, right? And they should be used in everything because they're amazing achievements in filmmaking. And a lot of this stems from George also, and George Lucas and his, how he thought of digital filmmaking, right? Plug for our Attack of the Clones April episode from a couple years ago.
Oh my gosh, 100%.
But I think there's got to be, again, that balance, like how you and I are balanced on this podcast. There's got to be a balance with filmmaking. Like you got to have the realism, the authenticity, as well as those digital effects, right? Because I think the marrying those two things together makes them even stronger when you do see them on screen. When you do go to an on-location place, you're like, wow, I'm in Aldani.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other side of the equation, when you're getting something that is more digitally focused, it doesn't, because there's that balance, like it doesn't necessarily like take you out of it, right? Because you're believing the environments by the actual environments they're filming in. So
right.
I don't know if I'm making sense, but like I think the marriage of these two things, the marriage of location with costume and making these environments feel like you're in the world of Star Wars is what allows us to drop into a galaxy far, far away. And that's why it's so important for this show and its prestige quality. And that's why we're talking about it. Yes, absolutely. And I want to share this quote from Tony Gilroy from an article in Gizmodo by James Whitbrook. Just I think it kind of speaks to the seriousness in which they're taking all of this and which we should talk about it with. So Tony Gilroy says, "That's been our attitude all the way through, not to be cynical and to take it more seriously than anybody ever took it. Even while we're changing, some people feel as though it's changing a lot, but even while we're changing the grammar of what you can do, we're trying very rigorously to be more serious about this shit than anybody has ever been." And he's there talking about Star Wars more broadly. And that's something we totally see in season 1, and just kind of knowing the outline of season 2, I fully expect to see in season 2 too. And I think that Brad, I think that's what he's mentioning here is season 2. But I think it speaks to the way in which they approached their world building, because we're in this such a character focused environment where we're following this one guy in the scope of this larger issue, in this time frame that's becoming more and more oppressive and difficult to be in. To take each element of the production with that same level of seriousness so that we can feel like the galaxy far, far away is not so far away after all. The realism of Star Wars, I think when Star Wars is real, it feels closer to who we are on Earth.
as opposed to in the galaxy far, far away. And we'll talk about it, but I think we see that a lot with like the Art Deco Coruscant of the prequels versus the brutalist Coruscant of now. And those things obviously coexist on Coruscant, but there's like a lot of interesting layers to the visual feel and what what they make us feel about Coruscant. Anyway, before we jump into everything, I would like to remind you that we have our Andor Again episodes on Patreon. So if you want to jump in to season 1 or go back to season 1 before we jump into season 2, we've done a little recap. That doesn't mean our episodes from season 1 are gone. They're still on our podcast feed from 2022. You can go back and enjoy those as well. We've also got a couple of other episodes about the artistry and production of Andor that we did back during season 1. And I would be remiss if we didn't highlight them because, you know, we're not talking about all the our elements of the artistry and production of Andor in this episode. So if you were interested in talking a little bit more about the writing and production, we were part of a roundtable interview with Bo Wilmon and Sanne Wollenberg. And if we wanted to hear a little bit about the music of Andor, we were also in a roundtable with composer Nicholas Bertel. So those are on the timeline as well, the feed as well. And I think everybody on both of those ask really great questions. So they're definitely worth listening to if you haven't already. Anything else to say before we move into costumes, Brad?
No, I think, it's an honor that we got to do those episodes, but definitely check them out. Nicholas Bertel, especially the GOAT, and Bo Wilmon, the GOAT.
Honestly, what a privilege to be able to ask a question to both of them because we admire their work in this series so very much. So the writing and the music, but we really do admire the work of all of the artisans on Star Wars. And that's why we want to talk about the costumes of Andor because holy moly, Mon Mothma. But before we get to Mon Mothma, I really want to talk about this idea of imperial conformity and the ways in which we're feeling that in various locations versus freedom of movement and how clothing can inform restriction or movement or both, depending on how you are positioned in the garment. And I know that sounds like a little ooh, but I am serious about it. And I want to start with where the season starts, which is I think the first element of design and costume that we get that's really explicit and really on our faces is Cyril when his supervisor's like, did you tailor your uniform? And he's like, yeah, I changed the piping. I brought it in, and clearly this guy doesn't care and thinks that he's very, very weird to do that. But I just want to ask you, Brad, how did that scene originally come off to you in learning about Cyril, the character, and also just seeing the way that costume fit him? And did you walk away with any feeling about what Pre-More is all about?
Yeah, I think a couple things, right? When we think of authority in Star Wars, I feel like there's always such a big emphasis in the Empire on the cleanliness of your uniform and having it be nice and shined and put together and straightened and ironed, right? And so there's this certain, I think the respect for authority and order kind of goes hand in hand with the costuming of the Empire. And same with Cyril here, right? He is somebody who is coming into this meeting with his manager talking about how 2 Coruscant officers were killed. He wants justice. He wants to get to the bottom of it. And his costume is sort of representative of who he is and why he has this desire to get to the root of what happened. He's tailoring his outfit because he has the utmost respect for law and order and he needs to,
right.
But also at the same time, it kind of fits him a little tightly. So I feel in some ways he feels maybe that's an indication that he feels a little constrained in his current role, right? He feels he's sort of he lacks freedom of movement and kind of the flexibility of his own decision making, ability to make decisions without answering to somebody else. And so I feel he gets a little loose. in this first arc. He gets a little irresponsible in his role. He gets a little power hungry, and he starts to, with the respect of authority, kind of venture outside of hierarchy.
Right. I think that their exchange is so interesting because you mentioned like he is tailoring it because he has the utmost respect for authority and for his position and all this stuff, and he believes in truth and justice, and so he should look his very, very best. But his like manager guy, it's not as fitted on him. It's a little bit looser on him. There are some more like wrinkles in the garment when he moves, and he's like, you know, to ask Cyril if he's tailored it is kind of a rejection of what he's done. Like, what did you do? Why would you do that? And I think it signals between him, you know, the lack of care that his manager has for, you know, the empire specifically, you know, maybe just kind of like in an abstract, like, why are they putting all these regulations on us sort of a thing? Why do we have to be in this uniform sort of a thing? But, you know, the uniform itself suggests conformity, and by tailoring it, he's not conforming in that same way. He thinks that he's like putting himself in the best position because he's so serious about it. But while you want it to be clean and pressed, you don't want to stand out, and he's standing out by kind of tailoring his costume and making himself look cleaner and more put together than the rest of his peers. Which I think is so interesting. But like, I also think in general, the costuming of the Empire with their jackets and how they wear their uniforms and how they're all together is once again like stripping away the personal identities of each person. And I think we see that because, of course, like the Empire doesn't want anybody to fall out of line. They want everybody obedient. That's kind of the whole point. So putting everybody together in those classic imperial costumes not only ties us to what the visual language that we already know of the original trilogy and the Empire and their sort of rigidity, but also just plants us in this current moment where we're already there for them. And that sort of rigidity is going out to the corporate sector too. It's not just the ISB and the stormtroopers and everybody else, but it's also influenced workwear fashion of the galaxy at large, of the corporate sector, who of course is entangled with the government, because why wouldn't you be?
Yeah, I find it interesting that kind of like standard uniformity not only is a core part of the Empire, but also like into the separate governing bodies around the galaxy, right? Like, sure, you can have your own jurisdiction, but like there are still some rules and expectations that you want to follow, right? Like not only behavior wise, but like how you look, how you present yourself, etc. Because like you're sort of a branch of the Empire in a way, right? And if you're not up to snuff, you're not up to our standards, like we'll come in, right? And again, like Cyril, I think the outfit kind of speaks to him, kind of speaks to his actions that he's going to take in these first 3 episodes and deviate from that and cause the Empire to come in, right? He's sort of an outlier. He's sort of a defect in the system in a way.
Right. And then we see him later in the series when we're seeing him in his own personnel style, which is also like low-key hilarious. When his mom is asking him about his collar and if he like changed up his collar. And also I say this so kindly, but his little fuck ass tie, like the way that ties are worn in the Star Wars galaxy is so funny to me. But every costume he's in, he tries to look crisp and clean and like the most, it's like he's putting on a mask in his own levels of confidence. He's trying to compensate for his lack of confidence by having this, outfit that is pressed and tailored and looking as perfect as it possibly can be, because we know deep down, but also not so deep down, that this is a highly insecure man who is very emotionally fragile.
Oh, my little boy. He's just such a mess. Such a mess.
He is such a mess. And he's trying to tell you with his outfits that he's not a mess, but he is a mess.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I think Cyril's gonna have some banger costumes in season 2, because we've seen a couple shots in trailers like where he's still wearing his little fuck ass tie.
Yeah.
And what appears to be on the planet Gorman, which, that'll be interesting. But yeah.
Yeah. I really look forward to seeing him in new costumes that maybe tell us a little bit more about who he is when he's not potentially accessing his own closet, if he's, not on Coruscant or anything like that. So the other kind of Imperial costuming that I want to take a moment to talk about, and we're definitely going to talk about this set too, but is Narkina 5. And the look of the Narkina 5 prisoners is so interesting because they're missing one key element in their costume, which is kind of the whole point, but that is the shoes. We are in an outfit, a shirt and pants, but we have no shoes. And so there's a certain lack of dignity to the Narkina 5 prisoners, which is entirely intentional, of course, in the way that they present. And they also, like, with this white jumpsuit or this white outfit on the stark white walls and the white floors and everything, like, they blend in with the space. They're kind of nothing within the space in a way, or indistinguishable from the space, which is also another dehumanizing factor, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think and not to get like too far ahead of ourselves with the set design, but the fact that Narkina 5 is such a white, sterile environment, and it really reminds you of almost a doctor's office in a way. And, think of every time you've ever been to a doctor's office and you've had to, put on one of those gowns or something. Maybe you're getting an x-ray or like a scan or something, right? And you gotta dress down, you put the thing on, you take your shoes off, and it feels like a little, I don't know, I don't love that feeling. And so, like, being in that kind of environment, like if I were barefoot, I would feel like very uncomfortable, like very cold, very exposed. And so right. I think that's the purpose of like not allowing the prisoners to have shoes, right? It'd be different if they were, outside at like maybe a Imperial prison camp and they were wearing shoes, and maybe there's a sense that they could escape, right? But being in such a environment where there is that vulnerability and that feeling of being exposed, and that you could be shocked at any moment on your bare skin, right? It kind of keeps you in line because there is no chance of escape, essentially. And if you try to, like, your feetsies are going to get a little shock.
But it's going to affect your whole body. It's not just your feetsies. It's not just like, ooh. And so there's always that when you are grounded, you are also vulnerable, which is, I think, really interesting. Like, the only time they're not necessarily vulnerable to getting shocked is when they're sleeping. But even then, there are no doors to stop them from stepping out, should they step out.
Right. Yeah, Kino Loy.
We see. Yeah.
He's like to Castian, I hope you're not a sleepwalker.
Right.
I was like, oh gosh.
Terrifying.
That's rough.
Terrifying. Is there anything else that, like, you think of when you think of Imperial conformity and rigidity within the costumes of Andor? Anything that stuck out to you in terms of design? If the answer is no, that's chill and fine.
Have we talked about Daedra?
Not really, not specifically. She's stuck in the Imperial machine, so she's wearing the Imperial costumes. She also gets a cool coat. So shout out to the coat. It's no cape, but like we live, Right. Yeah. More capes, please. But she's in the like interesting position of being a woman in the Imperial space, which we know is like both male dominated and human dominated. And she is still wearing the same outfit that the rest of them are, regardless of, her gender or her body. And so I think there's something to be said there about how, she is part of this machine, even though she is also disadvantaged within the machine.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially I don't think her coat is unique. to her. I think there might be other Imperials who, but it is still a great coat. Like
It's a great coat.
So yeah, no, I don't know. I love that a lot of these Imperial officers, like whether it's her or Krennic or even Thrawn, they have such like iconic outfits that you just, as soon as you see them, you're like, yep, that's them, right? Despite the uniformity of the Empire, like it still feels like some of these characters have such unique looks, which you wouldn't think would be the case for most of the Empire. It's like everybody has to look the same. It's like no, and you know, of course, too, there's like the look denotes the rank, right? So not only like the fact that like, hey, Daedra and some of the other ISB officers have like a single little pen thing in their pockets on each side of their chest, whereas like Thrawn has a double, right? And then, but he also has more of those square things on him as well, right? So there's just tons of different like little pieces, and like when do you get the official Krennic cape, right? Like
at what point do you get the cape? Because Dedra's a nothing if she doesn't have the cape, you know?
Right.
You're a somebody once you get the cape.
Yeah, the cape.
That's what I think.
The cape is pretty great. So.
Yeah. Speaking of like capes and flowiness, we can talk about like the opposite of conformity and the opposite of the Imperials, which is all of our rebels and all of our people that are moving about a little bit with a little bit less structure than our Imperials. And maybe the place to start with this is like the bridge character of Mon Mothma, right? Because we're going to talk about a lot of freedom of movement between the kids on Canary to the residents of Ferrix, to Aldhani heist, right? But Mon Mothma kind of straddles these two worlds. And I think that's what is like really interesting about her costumes, because they are stunning. They're so beautiful. And we get her like Chandrillan pendants. We get her just being like Genevieve O'Reilly, just being stunning, gorgeous, beautiful. And we get this sense of regalness from her. But in all of that, still, there is this sense of rigidity to her costumes that we don't have in her Rogue One and later appearances costumes. You know, her white gown in Rogue One is very flowy and stuff, but a lot of her costumes in Andor are heavily structured. There's some rigidity within the flowiness of the gown. She still can move. There's still dresses. There's still cloaks, but like the collar is structured, or there is a structure in the way that it's draped across the shoulder. And I think that can symbolize not only her wealth and her status, but also the worlds in which she lives in. She lives in between herself and her heart and within the Imperial machine.
Yeah, and I'm just pulling up this quote from StarWars.com from costume designer Michael Wilkinson, which he had said the fact that he wanted to bring elements of clothing from her home into what she wears in season 1, right? So there's a lot of like pale neutral tones. There's colors and textures from other iterations of Mon Mothma. And so I find the idea of like a lot of her clothing representing Chandrilla, which like she is a Chandrillan senator, right? So naturally she's going to wear that type of clothing. But if you're talking about the fact that her clothing seems more rigid compared to what she wears later when she's a rebellion leader, right? I think there's also maybe that's speaking to the fact that she comes from a planet where there are such like rigid traditions and like almost suppressive traditions. Like we see Leda and her little like girl group, and they're doing like their chants and stuff, and there's a certain level of disapproval from Mon and Vel and being like, why do they still do that, you know? And so you get the impression that a lot of stuff on Chandrilla is like very old fashioned and really limits your freedom. Mon's in this marriage that maybe if she were given a second chance, she wouldn't have been, right? So I think in some ways it's showing her costuming is showing that she feels a little stuck where she is, right? Compared to the white, like you said, the white flowy, free flowing costume that we know of Mon Mothma in Rogue One and Return of the Jedi, right? Like that is somebody who feels a little bit more liberated as a person because she has escaped this life that wasn't really for her anymore.
Right. And it's complicated because, you know, we're getting like costume as reference to place, and then costume then and now. And also you know, with how much structure we see within the Empire, you can also kind of compare costume to Empire. So there's like a bunch of layers there that I think are really compelling, because even if you go back to Genevieve O'Reilly's costume in Revenge of the Sith, which, oh God, it's really beautiful. It's like this structured overdress over this like more billowing puffy sleeve dress. And so it's definitely simpler than some of the things she's wearing now, but in Andor, but and less fitting, but it definitely lives alongside of Padme's costuming in Rogue One too, which is sometimes quite large and flowing and covering her pregnant body, and then towards the end when it becomes much more simple and confined to her. It's really interesting. It's really, really interesting. And her costumes are so beautiful. Genevieve O'Reilly just like really knocks the socks out of every single costume. She fits them all so beautifully. They're all tailored to her so beautifully. And one costume in particular I'd like to just like highlight as this the idea of like rigidity and freedom is this costume that she wears. I think it's in 7 or 8, and it's this white vested tunic, and she's wearing this sweater, this turtleneck sweater underneath it. And so there's a lot of freedom of the movement in the sweater, but the collar of the tunic is really structured and fitted and pleats very beautifully to one side, and then comes over the hips and onto her legs under this skirt or dress, which is not constraining her. And so it's interesting, these two layers in which they interplay with each other, and which we kind of see multiple parts of each other as she takes off the jacket that was covering the tunic once she gets home. So there's like different levels of comfort of this costume as she moves through different space too.
Totally. And I want to make one note too here. Just I think Mon, we didn't actually see her in Rots, which I always have to remind myself that she was actually just in the deleted scene, which is wild.
Right. The fact that like the deleted scene of Rots has become like one of the most important things in this time period 20 years later is so funny to me, because we go back to like Mask of Fear, Andor, like the fact that they called Genevieve O'Reilly of all people to like play this role again, like for Rogue One, is so funny. Keep going though.
Yeah. And I think just thinking of Rots in general, Trisha Bagar, who did the costuming for the prequels, I feel like she set the gold standard. And so how much time we spend on Coruscant in Andor kind of keeps us grounded in that prequel-esque era of Star Wars, where there's the necessity of costume and how costume has to really stand out all these spaces that Mon is interacting with, not only for herself in her home with Perrin and Lita, but the parties that they have, the dinner parties that they have, all the senators that come to their parties, different types of aliens, you really see a lot of that on full display in those scenes, where you still get the sense of like the Coruscant-y design scene. And I love that. And I think like you said, Padme kind of represented that did represent that in the prequels. And I just think we continue to see that through Mon. And it's lovely. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's also like very interesting to see her costumes next to Perrin's, because Perrin has a little bit more freedom in his costumes. They're like a little bit more Jedi tunic-y-esque, right? Like just the way the robes are flowing and the way that he's able to move between like the tunic and the the garments underneath. And so it's just interesting to see the difference in rigidity to the costumes among the Shrandrillan, you know, among the, like even Lita's costume is like a little bit more free flowing in its movement. It's not as structured with its rigidity. So she's like in a different position than Perrin and Lita are, which is interesting as well.
I think Perrin's probably a little removed too from the suffering of the galaxy. Like he's rubbing arms with the people who are threatening the shipping lanes for the Gorman people, right? And so to him, he's kind of living his luxury life. Of course, his costuming is going to reflect that, a little more free flowing, because he's like chill, he's relaxed, he's letting loose, right? But like Mon recognizes the hurt in the galaxy, and she's also putting on that facade as well. It's like she can't slip at all, not one bit, right? So, and her costuming is as much of a character as the expressions that she's constantly putting on for the cameras and for the Senate. Totally.
Do you have anything else to say about Mon Mothma before we jump to like everyone else?
No, let's do it.
Then I would love to talk a little bit about the folks on Kenari, the folks on Aldhani, and especially the folks on Ferrix, because there's just such a stark difference between the Imperial space, the Coruscanti space, and the upper class, next to the vibrancy and the what's the right word here? Maybe craftiness is the right word, but maybe it's not. But like the craftiness of the clothing on Kenari, Ferrix, and Aldhani, because they have a different relationship with their built environment, and they have a different relationship with themselves and with wealth and with freedom of movement and status, right? And so let's start with Kenari, because you know the show starts here, and we only see children, and I think that is really telling about the state that they are in and the way that they build their clothes around them. And one thing that Michael Wilkinson said that I thought was really interesting about Kenari was there was an Imperial mining disaster. The children of the planet are left to fend for themselves. He says it's your classic Lord of the Flies scenario. Totally different vibe. So they have this wild, primitive, feral kind of feel to it. And maybe that explains a little bit of older Cassian's innate wildness, and rebellion. I can't read is what we're learning in this episode. And I think that that's such an interesting way to put it, is that like we know the adults aren't around. And so we're in this Lord of the Flies scenario where all the children are having to fend for themselves. And what they're doing in that is, using clothing for as long as they can, maybe adapting clothing that they had from their parents, or that they still like maybe doesn't fit them quite yet. And then we see, once they decide to go fight, this makeup that they put on, which is clearly part of their culture and part of how they're trained to go fight and be a warrior. And that speaks to who they are too. But one thing that I think is so exciting about these costumes is how they interact with the land, and how, despite them being a bit, what's the right word? They feel a bit not of the jungle in terms of the stitching. They look a little like they've been quilted. The stitching, the colors all interact with the jungle, and like the ways that their accessories sit, I think speaks to their space as well. And so I think these costumes are really interesting and beautiful. And the individuality between all of them is interesting too, because they're clearly all having to create different identities for themselves amidst ruin.
Yeah, I'm looking at one photo, and I see like one guy who has sort of a yellowy coat on, and it almost looks like there's duct tape around it. And, maybe that's just a function of designing the costume, or maybe there's something more there with what has happened to this planet and this people, right? It looks like a lot of their costuming and even like their home is like stitched together from wreckage or from like spare parts of things, right? And so I like
Right.
part of me wonders like, is the clothing stuff that they have scavenged from visitors to Canary, right? Like they see the ship and it seems like they have no hesitation to go track it down and see what it's all about. So I anticipate it's not the first time that they've probably found a ship and maybe tried to scavenge it for parts or for clothes or
Yeah.
for supplies, right? And so I think that's why the clothing is not strictly earth tony. Like not everybody's earth tone. There are some reds in there. There's some blues, right? And
Well, some
and
bright oranges specifically.
yeah, some oranges, right? So there's a very wide mix of colors. It's not just brown and green and gray, you know.
But also in one of the costumes that I'm seeing now, there's like, it looks like rock climbing cord sort of around one young man's shoulders.
Oh yeah,
in sort
yeah,
of
I see
bandolier
that.
style.
Yeah,
And so there's just like a very interesting collection of material and of color, like this bright green, to make them individuals. But it's clear that because there's so much freedom in this, that they are trying to be individuals within this space and find themselves within that space, at least to me.
yeah, and it's really what's really interesting about Canary and the sort of variety of clothes that we see here too. I think of the rebels, right? Jungle environment. We know we're going to Yavin, right? And the rebels end up on Yavin, and I think the rebels are a ragtag crew who also have a very big variety of costuming. And so I don't know. I don't know if I have many more thoughts than that, but I think of it, you know, Cassian early in his life being on Canary with these people in the jungle, and then Cassian towards the end of his life being with sort of a similar
leaving Yavin.
group of fighters in the jungle towards his death, right? And so I don't know. I feel like these like bookend experiences for Cassian are very similar in a lot of ways. It represents like these resistance fighters who are getting by any means necessary, and sort of getting supplies along the way wherever they can find them.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, that he kind of comes full circle in terms of the sort of location where he's at and ultimately what they're going to do, which is investigate something unknown and try and figure it out. Very human full circleness in all of that. But also just like another really human place with a lot of human costumes and other being costumes. But my point being humanity as opposed to rigidity, is the people of Ferrix. And Ferrix, we're going to talk about as a space. It's hard. It's a little bit difficult, I think, to take apart the pieces of Ferrix because it feels like, well, the community goes together with the costumes, goes together with the set design. Like they all exist in community and we are in community with Ferrix. Like, but I want to break these things down just a little bit because the people of Ferrix live in such a vibrant sort of environment. And it's clear when you watch the show that these are people that have lived together and that have created a society together that they are really proud of. And I think you see that in their clothing just as much as any other element of Ferrix. It's interesting because Michael Wilkinson said that he wasn't content to create a handful, this is from a StarWars.com article, wasn't content to create a handful of silhouettes and dye them a variety of colors and make them look like they were wearing uniforms. He wanted his team infused individualism into every costume, reflecting the character it was worn by. At the outset, he encouraged his team to consider unique details to inform each design, such as what is their job? Where do they get their clothes from? How do their clothes reflect what they do, who they are, and what's important to them? He says that Japanese workwear inspired some of the silhouettes, and of course that Japanese inspiration, not only are we going to Japan here for Star Wars Celebration this year, but Japanese inspiration dates back to the very early days of Star Wars and also to Trisha Beggar's designs on the prequels, especially for characters like Padme. And so it's really interesting that we're getting some of those influences and pieces in the people of Ferrix. But it's also really cool that like the people of Ferrix, it seems like their style is cool. Despite kind of not being a very wealthy place or like a very stylish place, they still have a very strong sense of style, which I like.
Yeah, I'm looking at a similar quote from Michael, and he talks about the all the workwear elements between quilting and
yep.
safety gear and protective materials to create the world of Ferrix. And I think that's probably why I'm so in love with Ferrix, because all of the costumes do feel like people just came home from work, like a very industrial manual job, right? Like the first time we meet Bix, she's got the safety helmet on, like that you would typically see a welder wear. She's got, I think she's got like gloves on, or like really long arm wraps.
Mm-hmm.
She's had a long day, right? And so you immediately know so much about that character just from how she looks. Like you know she's probably very handy. She's not afraid to get her hands dirty. That she probably has a lot of really good technical expertise on how things work and operate and can be fixed. And that I think that's just, again, like why costuming is so important, because you don't want to have to take the time to explain those character attributes. You want to just be able to show a character and immediately know so much about them. Like same with Brasso. He's wearing these giant overalls, these big gloves, along with all the other
overalls.
all the other workers who wear these big gloves in the glove wall, right? And so that these people, like Brasso's a big guy. Like you probably know he's rough and tough. He's lifting heavy objects. He's not only like getting his hands dirty, but probably his hands are completely calloused over from whatever he's doing on his job, right? And so he's a gruffy guy. So of course he's gonna hit a cop in the head with a brick. Like who among us wouldn't?
Who among us would look like that and not do that?
Right.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, because he's such a big rough guy and has this rough and tough job, he's also the one that's selected to carry Marva's brick down the road during the Rick's Road episode, because he's sort of this immovable object that represents a pillar of the Ferrix community. He cannot be knocked down. He is a brick effing wall. Literally carrying he's a brick wall carrying a brick to the wall.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, he's just such a cool character, and I just loved him the moment I saw him.
Yeah, I think there's a friendliness to his costume too. Like we immediately trust him as a leader and as a person, because he is so he feels so reliable, and also because his workwear is reliable. Like I love the short sleeve cut of the outer layer under the overalls, and then the long sleeve layer under that, and then the overalls. Like who doesn't love a person in overalls? Overalls are like, that's my friend. If an evil person's wearing overalls, they're not styling themselves correctly to be evil, is my thought. But yeah, I just love the elements of Ferrix and how the costuming tells us so much about who they are as a people, and who they are as individuals too. It's a beautiful sense of community. And I think we have to mention, one member of this community, a pillar, if you will. A pillar, if you will.
Oh, I know where this is going.
My legend, my king. The time grappler. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course.
For giving me this opportunity to speak about the love of my life. The time grappler, the guy who is telling time by banging on an instrument, which is just incredible. Amen. Beautiful. And like the colors, the greens, the oranges, these are all earth tones. These are all connections to the planet, like the oranges and the reds of the soil, the green of the grass and the trees. This is seen in all of the folks on Ferrix and on those of Canary. So it's like an interesting connection between the two of them. The tones are a little bit more muted. There's a certain liminess to the Canary greens that's a little earthier in Ferrix, but these colors still remain. And the time grappler is such a pillar of telling the story of Ferrix. And in addition to like his workwear uniform, which I don't know, sometimes it's like a skirt over pants, and then this like wide belt, and his vest and tunic, and then he's got his mallets for his instrument. He's so cool. And he's got his headphones, because you want to wear ear protection while you don't want to hit your decibels too loud, or else you're going to lose your sense of hearing, and you only get one of those. So, well, you get two because you have 2 ears, but You only get one opportunity to keep your hearing. So, he's just in such an interesting figure, and I love all of these costumes so very dearly. I know I feel like we're moving really fast through all of these things, but we have so much to talk about. The last thing I want to mention with costumes is Aldani, because once we get to Aldani, we get a different sense of the costumes too. Of course, our Aldani rebels like have to blend into the heist and the empire, but before that, they are, you know, like essentially farmers, people living on the land, people attempting to blend in, and in doing that, they are shepherds. And they're using natural fabrics to kind of blend in. So everything is very dark and textural and organic, says Wilkinson. You really get the sense of this incredible Star Wars universe because we're getting kind of the different, you know, feelings of each of these places. And the thing that I think is so striking about the Aldani looks are these cloaks that they wear, that are like lined with like Sherpa, for like on the ends of them, but they're these whites and blues and with a little bit of red, and they're just so beautiful, but they also come together so uniquely, and they flow. So I love that there is a sense of adaptation to the space as well, because I would imagine that the wind really gets windy out there, and that having that extra layer is important for them.
I remember the first time one of the Aldani images came out of Cassian and he was in that poncho.
Yeah. The poncho.
Oh, God. Star Wars with ponchos.
We love a poncho.
Like, you could be just the worst piece of Star Wars media. You throw a poncho in there, top 10.
Immediate raise. Yeah. And I'm not.
It's just, I don't know. There's just something about it.
I'm going to mention Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and I'm not suggesting that is worst piece of Star Wars media, and that the ponchos are what really boosted those up there. But trust me, I'm not trying to say that. I love Fallen Order. But my point being is the Cal Kestis is potentially Poncho King. You know.
Right.
King
Let's
of
just
ponchos.
give a little shout out to some ponchos that we've seen in Star Wars. We've seen Luke. That's poncho,
the OG
like
poncho.
Yeah, Cal Kestis and the poncho. We got the Endor ponchos. We've seen Jango Fett in a blue poncho.
Mm-hmm.
Qui-Gon in a poncho. Rey in a poncho.
Mm-hmm.
Luke in a poncho. Oh, there's so much poncho love.
Yeah, and
so much.
I say
Jyn Erso's been in a poncho.
I think the more ponchos in Star Wars, the better. Great,
and Anakin, by the way.
Exactly. Great piece of our article of clothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I support it.
I think we should have a poncho episode solely about the poncho. We should rank top 10 ponchos.
Top 10 ponchos. I'm so glad we're on the same page about that. Well, too bad April 1st has passed, because that would be a solid April 1st episode.
Yeah, or if we had a
April
month
Fool's
that started with
ponchos.
P. Yeah, we could do poncho February.
Unfortunately, we don't live in such a world, so we will have to figure out another time to inject our poncho agenda into our Star Wars podcast. But while we're all searching, we're gonna before we all go searching, let's dive into the set design. And I'm so sorry, I have so many quotes and so many thoughts about set design. So apologies in advance to Brad, who probably is unprepared for this level of Sarah. I want to start with this quote about space. And this is a quote from Vincent Labrodo, who wrote, "Space can express power, oppression, freedom, joy, fear, paranoia, and a myriad of emotions, moods, and atmospheres based on the relationship between the characters and their environment." And this is, obviously what Andor is doing here is evoking all of these emotions within the space and how our characters interact with the space and how we interact with our characters on screen. And I think one of the there's so many interesting pieces of set design, from Luthen's shop to Mon to Coruscant, all these things. We'll talk a little bit about all of them, but I want to start with Coruscant, because the Coruscant we have here in Andor is different than the Coruscant that we know from the prequels, right? And we know that these were created differently too. We were talking at the beginning of this episode about the digital architecture and improvements in digital cinema and how important those are to Star Wars, and that is shown in how we understand Coruscant, which is this place that is like chrome and futuristic and sleek and Art Deco in nature at times, and has all these specific design elements that make it feel like a place of the future. You know, when we think about like the Jetsons or one of these older shows, older science fiction that gives us a particular image of the future. And it feels like Coruscant fits in with that image. I don't know if there are anything you think of when you think of like what a future city should look like, Brad, or if you have any thoughts about how Coruscant made you feel watching the prequels.
Yeah, well, in the prequels, I feel like I was always captured in episode 2 with like the underground sort of nightlife that we saw. Immediately thinking of Zam Wessel when she is on the one building and there's a pink billboard behind her that's you know, outlining her silhouette. Going to like the lower levels, and there's like the bar scene and the pod racing that's on the TV, right? So there's a lot of like very neon-y kind of colors, giving a lot of like Blade Runner futuresque vibes. And so that was one of the things that I always loved in the prequels. And then now, you know, kind of the comparison to Andor, where it feels like all the color has been drained out of Coruscant. There is no nightlife, right? Like the people, not only are they reeling from war and the end of war. I granted, we're many years removed from the siege of Coruscant and the end of the Clone War, but you know, the city was completely devastated by a war eventually. So it kind of, I feel like it's sort of emblematic that like there's a new order, and in some ways the uniformity of the Empire is sort of feeding into the city, and by nature the city is losing its spirit.
I think it's an interesting point. And I think like the other thing to think about when we think about the prequels in relationship to Andor is that we're seeing a different part of Coruscant. Like Coruscant is big and vast, and some things are old and some things are new. And there's also a huge, absolutely gigantic divide in class on Coruscant. You have all the people from the richest and the wealthiest of the wealthy to, you know, diplomatic sorts of people, to everyday people who work 9 to 5, to people who are just scraping by, to people who don't even see the light of day because they live on such low levels of Coruscant. And I think that there's a really interesting piece of that. And it kind of like makes me think a little bit of the architecture of the Chinese city Chongqing, which if like you ever come across a reel from that city and they're like, so we're getting out of my apartment on level 12 and we're going to walk down to level 8, which is considered the ground floor. And then we're going to go down 2 levels to the park. But oh, there's a highway 18 levels down. And you're like, where are we? Like, what is the census place? It seemed like a really incredible city and like a really fascinating place, and one that's like meticulously planned. But there's a sense of like, wow, there's a lot happening here. It's perhaps a little bit overwhelming. And there's perhaps like a mix of old and new and built and natural in that environment in order for everybody to like go to work and live fulfilling lives and all that stuff. So I think like Coruscant as an idea is really interesting. And then to bring Coruscant into the architectural vision of brutalism, delicious. So let me talk a little bit about brutalism, if you don't mind. Brutalism is an architectural style popular post-World War II, so 1950s, 1960s, characterized by simple block-like forms and raw concrete construction. And so like the key features of brutalism are its like huge forms, rough surfaces, concrete coloring, so these, you know, beiges and grays, and sort of unusual shapes, which is really interesting because concrete we associate with block and rigidity, and yet a lot of brutalism gives us these very interesting dynamic shapes. There's this great article I read in GQ by a writer called Brad Dunning, and he writes, brutalism is the techno music of architecture, stark and menacing. Brutalist buildings are expensive to maintain and difficult to destroy. They can't be easily remodeled or changed, so they tend to stay the way as the architect intended. And I think it's so interesting that we kind of combine the sort of Art Deco and the sort of chrome aesthetic of the prequels with this sort of brutalist idea of Andor, because, you know, not only I think does it just suggest conformity and sort of a colorless existence, but it also kind of talks about like maybe the new and the old. Maybe like the apartment that Edie lives in is much older than Mon Mothma's senatorial space, you know? Maybe it was built 100 years earlier, which then they've changed the materials that they use or the space that they allot to an apartment. And so those ideas are really interesting to me. But before like I go any further, I just like want to ask you, now that we talked a little bit about the Art Deco style and got an introduction to brutalism, like what were your thoughts when you saw, oh my God, we're going back to Coruscant, of course, if we remember that first initial trailer, like, oh, that's Coruscant. And then seeing like Edie's apartment and the very brutalist architecture of the way that people were walking around to and from places on Coruscant.
I think I think you hit the nail on the head. Like I appreciated the fact that we're seeing different parts of Coruscant, like not the typical skyrise building. Right. Like I
Right.
totally agree. Like Edie's apartment feels like maybe the equivalent of what you would find today in like our country, where you go to like a house that was built 120 years ago, right? And then you look at a lot of the new builds, the new construction builds, and they are always like kind of very uniform, where it's like, oh, this is millennial gray with you know, the kind of gray or tiling or luxury
Like
vinyl
this,
flooring, you know, that's not really
right.
true hardwood. But then you go to like an old house, it's like got real hardwood floors, it's got, you know, some hardwood trimming or some wood trimming, it's got like, you know, maybe some old like green kind of colors that really resonated with like the 60s,
You're like,
50s.
nobody's changed a tile in here.
Mm-hmm.
This tile is not in style.
Yeah. And so I think Edie's house is definitely emblematic of that. Which, by the way, I know some folks who went to Celebration London got to see some of those areas that Cyril walks through in those episodes. So that's very cool, by the way, that we
Yes.
you know,
A lot
those
of
are real places in the world. I did get to go to the place where he stalks Daedra, which is like right outside of the Canary Wharf station.
Yeah.
Also where they filmed the one Rogue One scene.
Yes. There's also it's a place called Brunswick Center.
Mhm.
And there's another like really popular. I haven't been to the UK to look at all these lovely brutalist buildings, but I would like to. The Barbican Theater is another like popular or known brutalist architecture. There's a couple of them that I think are really, really interesting structures. I don't know if you knew this about me. It's kind of a secret thing. It's kind of like just a little like, ooh, that's exciting. Is like, I love architecture. Like I've gone on the Chicago architecture tour multiple times. Like I think architecture is very cool. So I'm very excited to be talking about this, but like brutalism is a super polarizing style too. So like it's really interesting because it is so stark and is so aggressive in its nature that some people really don't like it, despite maybe the uniqueness of its forms. And so here's another quote from an article by Pat Finn in Architizer. The movement of brutalism was the most uncompromising expression of the modern impulse to strip away the weight of architectural history and expose architecture for what it really is, a fundamental practical art that should serve the needs of ordinary people. And then when we talk about ordinary people, we can like tiptoe into the conversation of like, when was this art popular and what movements were popular in this moment? From Wikipedia, they write, brutalism's popularity in socialist and communist nations owed to its traditional styles being associated with the bourgeoisie, whereas concrete emphasized equality. And I think that's like a really interesting element to this, because we can talk about the sort of colorless life of brutalist architecture, but there's a certain functionality to brutalist architecture too. If we don't live with all this ornate embellishment, then maybe we can all have something. And I think that's an interesting idea. And also knowing who we're talking to in Andor as we're moving through Coruscant, like Edie is very much a normal person. Cyril is very much a normal person. He doesn't want to think he is, but he is. He's got a 9 to 5. And so it's interesting that, we can associate the brutalism with Coruscant, the brutalism with the Empire, maybe the brutalism with bad, but like the brutalism is also serving, this architecture is serving a purpose for the people in providing home, in providing space, in providing places to wander and meander and go. And so I just think that bringing this brutalist architecture into a place like Coruscant is really compelling, really interesting. And I'm glad that they're pulling on real structures that we can go visit if we wanted to. Because that architecture is still there in a lot of places, despite, some people's desire to take it down. And it should stay. I think I love architecture. Cookie cutter houses make me sad just a little bit because I understand that like there's so much necessity in that and it's okay. And like 99% of people can't afford like a custom home, even if it's not a McMansion, but we lose some of that like interesting actual architectural quality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm just thinking about like New England homes. Anyway, I have lots of thoughts about architecture in place, but
well, speaking of homes, you want to talk about, let's talk about Mon Mothma's home a little bit, because I think that's, speaking of maybe somewhere that's not as brutalist, right? I think Mon Mothma's home has sort of a more symmetrical kind of look to it. Right. It's not as edgy. It's a little softer around the edges, I would say, right? It's got a lot of like lush whites. It's got some roundness to it, right? Not really sharp corners. A lot of open space, a lot of there's like some panels that I think she walks through to get to her dinner table, and I would imagine if you'd they look like open panels, right? Like there's some designs in them, so even if you were to close them, there'd be some light still escaping through into the whole home. So like the home is very well lit, right? Very white, very which is funny because a lot of the imperial insides that we see are also like this white, but it's sort of less of a cold white here. It's a warmer white. So I thought getting to see the inside of Mon's home was really cool. I know I really appreciated that one door, which wasn't completely round, but it was sort of like almost like a hexagonal, which made me think of, the rebellion and the way that she was framed in that one shot. It looked like she was sort of the center of the rebellion logo, and the door was kind of forming the wings around her. So there's some kind of cool, cool imagery there. That. I know. I
forgot those images, and people on Twitter are like, "Look at the shape.
So,
look at the shape."
There's some interesting things going on in her home for sure.
Yeah, I want to start I want to bring in this conversation of symmetry and asymmetry in the similar way that we frame the conversation of conformity and nonconformity or freedom of movement. This is from an essay called "Symmetry and Emotional Impact in an Analysis of Andor Set Designs," which is really kind of the spark that was like, I want to talk about this stuff, by Mariana Schwartz. And for anyone interested, it's in a collection of a celebration of Star Wars. It was a pop culture conference from DePaul University in 2024 that I attended. And so interesting. Anyway, she writes, symmetry is associated with rest, binding, order, law, formal rigidity, constraint, boredom, stillness, monotony, fixity, stasis, and simplicity. Asymmetry, on the other hand, represents motion, loosening, arbitrariness, accident, life play, freedom, interest, chaos, surprise, detachment, flux, and complexity. All the words, right? And so once again, I think Mon Mothma's space, this kind of Chandrillan influenced space, straddles the line between some rigidity and some fluidity and some warmth within the asymmetry. You mentioned the white of her walls and kind of how bright it feels in that space, but it doesn't feel like you're under the spotlight, which is so interesting. And I think the golds on the walls and just the accent throughout the space make it feel like a warmer space. But that being said, it's also so pristine. It doesn't feel like when they go into that room that has the big conversation pit couch, and that couch is 20 20 feet long and everybody's sitting 8 feet apart. You know? It doesn't feel like a space that's entirely comfortable. The space is visually warm, but it's not comfortable. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go jump on the couch. It looks so cozy. Or like, I'm going to go have dinner at the table and it's going to be so fun. It seems a little bit more sterile than that, but the space itself is still trying to evoke the sense of calmness and gentleness to it, which I think is really interesting. The screens that you mentioned, like there's some like Eastern influence, Eastern Asian influence on this. Once again, you know, we're talking about so much of Star Wars influence from Japan. The screens like as shoji screens, but also we see bonsai trees in Mon Mothma's home. So there's another like explicit influence. And then I was watching a video from somebody with an architecture background who's talking about how that door that you were talking about is really interesting because it like evokes the idea of potentially a Chinese moon gate, which are like often freestanding in gardens and are really beautiful and serene. But this one, you're right, it's a little more geometric, which to me evokes a little bit of the imperial influence and the imperial crest, which I think is kind of like everywhere on Coruscant as it relates to anybody in the Empire, anybody adjacent to the Empire, that particular space. And so there's like a really interesting variety of influences on her space that make it both a place to come home to, but not a place where she can fully rest and take off all her masks.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like the fact that, yeah, it's not, her home is not completely like a completely safe space for her to drop that. I do think the couch is interesting because like the one scene where she talks to Tay Kolma on the couch, it's almost as if they, right, like the room and the couch is facing the whole party. So does like you said, like despite the look of comfort potentially, you're still being perceived there, right? Like you're still exposed very directly. And there's not really anywhere to hide because of how open the space is. So Mon has to really resort to other places outside of her home to have privacy when really like your home should be your most private place. It's a little messed up for Mon. Yeah, that's why she's probably so tired because how do you live that kind of life?
Honestly, between the kind of complexity of the clothes she has to wear and the spaces she has to move through, when do you ever get to take all of that off and actually rest? Especially when you're in a sort of loveless marriage where the person you're next to every night is not somebody that you can truly confide in. And I imagine that's difficult for her. Mon Mothma, I feel for you. Love you, Queen. Please stay healthy, hydrated, and happy forever. Yeah, so Mon's space kind of like moves between those two worlds once again. And it's so interesting because one place that like does not move between those two worlds and where this idea of like you're being watched all the time and this is a place where you can't escape is Narkina 5, which we talked about the way that the costumes make the characters kind of blend in, makes them feel maybe sterile, makes them feel uncomfortable in that space. I'm here to once again, and maybe I'll lay it to rest one day, but that day is not today. Speak about the Panopticon, Michael Foucault, everybody. The idea of the perfect prison where there's a tower in the center, has one guard, circular around the tower is the prison cell, and you can fundamentally watch everybody at all times. Which creates like a lack of need for the labor and also a sort of chilling effect where everybody knows they're being surveilled all the time. On Narkina 5, which also if we're thinking about the Imperial crest, is kind of the hub and spoke of the Imperial crest, the Imperial shape, where there's the center and then there's all the spokes out of the dorms, I guess, the cells. You're getting that Imperial design there as well, which is so interesting. And I just like have to ask you our first impressions since we did our Andor season 1 rewatch recently, like your first impressions of Narkina 5 and this space where we find Kino, Loy, and all of our Narkina 5 prisoners.
Yeah, no, I kind of mentioned it earlier, and this is the fact that it kind of feels like a hospital, like a very sterile place. And there's this quote that you pulled from Wikipedia maybe like a passage from Wikipedia that says, according to production designer Luke Hull, the rooms were designed to be a mix between a laboratory and an asylum, with the prisoners being confined in large windowless spaces until they crossed from cells to workrooms. Skybridge is their only glimpse into the outside world. And the sets were designed to evoke a sickly hospital atmosphere to which end both the walls and the lights were white or ivory colored. So yeah, again, like a sickly hospital atmosphere, right? Like hospitals aren't comfortable places.
No.
Being in this kind of atmosphere is like, it's like unnerving. It's uncomfortable. It's not homey. It's not inviting. It's kind of you don't want to be in a hospital longer than you need to, right? And so to be living every single one of your days and every one of your minutes and hours and in this kind of place would take a toll on somebody, especially over how many months or years people have been in here. Makes me wonder, like, how long has Olaf been in here, right? So just a horrible, horrible place. But I think to your point about the panopticon invoking the idea of being watched, right? Like that's all it is. It's the idea of being watched, when in reality there's just the one guard. So I think that like kind of false perception of control being dismantled in the Nobody's Listening episode, where Cassian kind of makes that realization that like, hey, they're short staffed. Nobody's listening. Nobody gives a shit. Power doesn't panic, right? They're panicked because they know as soon as that illusion breaks, it's the jig is up for them, right? That's why they fry an entire floor of people, because like you can't break that illusion, right? You have to keep the panopticon intact.
Yes. And like this imperial kind of space and the illusion of the way where how power is concentrated and surveillance, yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is like also mentioned or also like shown, I think, in the meeting room that we often visit at ISB. First of all, the ISB building looks like the Death Star reactor. In this essay, I will change my mind. You can't. But that particular meeting room is also the Imperial Crest, and it has this like geometric kind of pattern to it as well that we see throughout parts of Star Wars and parts of Andor. But the symmetry emphasized the high level of rigidity in the Empire, and the fact that room is like circular, evoking the cog, but it also has everybody kind of looking at each other, surveilling each other. Yes, having some sort of circular space is maybe good for a larger meeting where you're going to have to talk to many constituents, maybe many people in that meeting. However, there's a sort of insidious feeling in the lighting and the space itself, I think. Especially when Patergaz tells Deidre after a meeting to watch her back. Because, you know, there's a whole lot of people that their eyes are on her. So I think that's a really interesting, piece of symmetry as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think the fact that the meeting room is circular and you don't know who you're being watched by at that moment, right? You can't check all your angles. So it makes the situation even more complicated for Lonnie, right? Like imagine the pressure that he's under, where it feels like you're under constant surveillance. Mm-hmm. You're surrounded by 20 people, plus the actual video surveillance, plus whatever audio surveillance, and
all the bugs.
Oh my God, Jesus! Like talk about a stressful job,
right? Like answering emails was fine in comparison.
Yeah, but like trying to dismantle the Empire from the inside and being a spy for Luthen Rail, whew,
seems kind of stressful.
Yeah, I don't want that.
Right.
I'll apply to a different job. Right.
Well, maybe we could do a job on Ferrix. There might be some openings at any point in time. They probably need some people to help with the scrapping of the ships, and there's some. I think we got to talk about not just the individual spaces on Ferrix here for a minute, but I think we really need to talk about the fact that like Ferrix was an entirely built set and you could really run anywhere and be in a different, like the whole Rix Road area, all built up on a backlot. Like, I think that's so cool. And I wish they would let me walk through it. Me personally, and everybody else, but me personally first.
I think they should rebuild the set specifically for you.
Thank you.
Do you remember, by the way, at Celebration Anaheim when we got that big Mando walkthrough experience?
We did the exhibit, exhibit.
Yeah.
Yes.
I sincerely wish, and I know this is not happening in Japan because it's a much smaller convention, but like, damn, I wish we had gotten that for Andor. Like, imagine the glove wall. Just getting to see the glove wall in person.
Stop. No.
Like, where do they put these things? Like, where did the glove wall go? Like, did they just like get rid of it and like toss it in the trash?
They should put the glove wall in Lucasfilm.
What are they doing? What are they doing with the
just
glove
to
wall?
have it.
Like, we'll take it. Just give it to us. It's fine.
We can have a traveling glove wall exhibit. These are Brassos, you know? But yeah, zooming in on Ferrix a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about Marva's house, because we talk about symmetry, and now we have to talk about asymmetry, because even the layout of Rick's Road is asymmetrical. The buildings are kind of all asymmetrical. They all are kind of put together, not haphazardly, but over time to create this built environment, similar to Coruscant. Over time, kind of things just kind of fall into place. But that feels a lot earthier, a lot more specific than a space like Coruscant does. And in Marva's house, it's really interesting because Luke Hull talked about how, you know, she can't keep up with her home anymore. And so things are kind of going to the wayside. And even though there's no symmetry in the house too, there's also no sense of cleanliness is not the word I'm looking for, because I'm not trying to suggest the opposite with Marva, but like there's no sense of like, oh, everything is in its place. Tidiness is the word I'm looking for. And so I think that's really interesting. But, you know, when you walk into Marva's space, but whether it be through B2's charging station or her chair that she sits in, or the way that they walk through that space, but it's clear that it feels very lived in for all of them. And I think that that's like one of the pieces of asymmetry is like when we're in this asymmetrical space that makes us feel like there's a lot happening in the space. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It kind of suggests that we've been living in the space and that we've been molding the space, and that over time things accumulate in the space to create this sense of asymmetry or untidiness, that everybody's in motion all the time as opposed to being in a sterile environment. So I think that like the asymmetry of the places in Ferrix is like really valuable and special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think asymmetry kind of breeds personality.
Sure.
Right? Because like the presence of asymmetry, like a lived in space, like think of the Millennium Falcon. That is a very like in many ways asymmetrical thing. I mean, it's kind of symmetrical with the exception of the cockpit.
Only on one side.
yeah. But like the inside of it is like so messy and so dirty.
Yeah.
And compare that to the Millennium Falcon that we see in Solo, which is like very kept together by Lando. And, you know, Lando obviously is a very clean guy. Not to say he doesn't have personality, because it's not as like, you know, symmetrical and neat and everything and tidy. But like I think of a place like Ferrix and how lived in it does feel, and how natural that feeling is for those people. And then compare that to the symmetry of the Empire that we were talking about. And, you know, I think of Partagaz's line where he talks about how their job is being healthcare providers. They treat sickness and they kind of get rid of the, what is it called? Like essentially like the virus. Like they get rid of the virus, they get rid of the tumor or whatever however they phrase it. And I think to them, like, again, that tumor is the asymmetry of the galaxy. It's not because the asymmetry breeds differing opinions. It breeds uniqueness. It breeds. They want that uniformity. They want law. They want order. They want if the galaxy could look like the inner workings of every imperial room, they would make it happen, right? And it's why oftentimes when we see like these planets where they start to establish their presence and you know, put in these structures and put up barricades, like it feels so unnatural. Like when we start to see that happen on Ferrix and we see that old building that they take over become an imperial compound, it is so sickly compared to everything else in the town.
They start putting like white boxes in front of it and you're like, ew, this is such a vibrant colored lovely place, and you're just putting here some like white boxes.
Yeah,
How
but they
dull.
view the personality and the asymmetry of Ferrix as a disease, when really they are the invasive species there. They are the sickness that is taking over like a cancer in that town. And so I just think it's interesting that they see themselves as healthcare providers when really they are the virus themselves. Ferrix, I just love Ferrix. I have such a love for that place.
Yeah, I think like, I don't know if you have any other kind of specific thoughts here, but before we close out, but I think like maybe the key takeaway of all of this is that what we see on screen tells us so much about who we're interacting with and how and if we should trust them and how and if we should engage with them. And I think that like Andor is just such a prime and clear example of that visual language in action. Because while it's not as explicit or maybe regimented as like, here's the Empire. They all wear white and black and gray. And here's the rebellion. And they've got their orange jumpsuits and their, particular style of shirt. And these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. All the texture and individuality within our good guys and all the colors that they wear, the spaces that they inhabit and the ways that they move, like gives us so much more depth to the nature of like good versus evil and to how complexly we should engage with them. So I think there's so much here, and I loved going back and watching season 1 with this in mind and thinking about the ways in which these sets and spaces made me feel, in which the costumes made me go, the artistry, but also like, ooh, that tells me a lot about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll add to that and say, I think it's also the amount of time we get to spend in these places. When you think about it,
totally.
We spend as much time, if not more time, in Ferrix than like any other planet in Star Wars, maybe, except for Tatooine or Coruscant.
We're always on Tatooine.
But like we spend more time on Ferrix than we do on Hoth or on Endor or on Mustafar or on Kashyyyk, right? Like these are planets that are so iconic, but Ferrix is a character. Ferrix is the people. Ferrix is Cassian. It's a representative of, your neighborhood, any neighborhood that you want to apply to, right? Apply it to. And I think that's the nature of the show, taking the time to be there and remain there, right? Like I think so often, and this isn't a diss on anything, but like, there's just a lot of planet hopping in Star Wars, like Mandalorian, for example. Like we are moving around quite a bit. So we don't necessarily get to spend time in these places and we spend enough time there to kind of like know it and feel it and kind of understand it a little bit, but we spend so much time on Ferrix that like every little detail has to matter because we need to differentiate it week to week and like show you a new aspect of it that maybe you haven't seen before. That's kind of wild to think about, that like Coruscant and Ferrix are like probably like the top 2 most screen timed places in live action Star Wars. I'm wondering if somebody has like a pie chart of that because I know people have done that before for things, but what's the screen time of Ferrix?
Let's find it. If not, let's get our stopwatches out and let's make it.
Ooh, I like that idea. Next project, another rewatch. Let's go. Damn, that sounds horrible.
All right. I think we've said a lot of things in this episode, and hopefully we all walk away with a greater appreciation of some of the visual artistry of Andor. I'm not good at an outro, so even though I did the intro, I'm going to make Brad do the outro.
All right, I see how it is.
Yeah, I'm not great at the outro. I'm good at my
reverse it.
Yeah, segment here, but let me live.
No, I really enjoyed getting to talk about this. Again, there's just so much prestige to the show, and so any opportunity to celebrate Andor in the month of April,
that's right,
we will happily do. And that's what we're going to continue to do. So like if you haven't already checked out our episodes for Andor April, if you're listening in the future, we should have 5 total for the month of April, plus 3 more the week-to-week episodes for season 2. So we'll have about 8 in total, beginning from like April into May, which is wild to think about. As Sarah mentioned, we also have all of our season 1 coverage, some interviews with the creatives. We have our Mask of Fear book discussion, interview with Alexander Freed as well on that novel. So much to talk about in the world of Andor, and I'm sure we will do it beyond April because Andor is just going to live with us forever.
That's right.
It's going to leave its mark. It's going to be seared into our brain. It's going to alter our brain chemistry, which is why we're here.
It already has. I think about episode 10 all the time.
I know. But if you want to get all those future episodes, make sure you're subscribed to us on any podcast feed. Follow us on our socials, mainly Blue Sky and Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel where we post all of our episodes. and just drop us a review. That's also a really nice thing to see every now and then, is get a review, see how you like the show, give us a comment. If you're a fellow Andor lover, let us know.
Yeah, we really do love to hear from fellow people who like Andor. So tell us if that's you. Thank you so much to our patrons who help keep the lights on here at Friends of the Force, who, help us ensure that we're able to keep podcasting and that we sound okay. So thank you so much to Abigail, Andy, Ben, Brian, Cheryl, Clay, David, Emma, Jennifer, Josephine, Jules, Katie, Knights of Ren, Krista, Logan, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Nicole, Rob, Ruth, Santa, Sky Talker, Slowcatcher, Travis, Viglyph, and our newest patrons, who are Abigail, Amy, and Ian. Thank you all so very much for your support. Like, genuinely, it means a whole lot to us. And hope you are enjoying some Andor April episodes. We will have episodes throughout the year that are Patreon exclusive, just yapping about this or that. So if you're interested in that, that's where you'll find those things. But thank you to everyone who takes time out of their day to join us here at Friends of the Force. We're so very grateful for your time and hope you are enjoying Star Wars in this moment as much as we are, because God bless, there's so much good stuff right now. And if we are going to see you in Japan, please say hi. We would love to say hello. We have a panel Sunday, April 20th at 11 a.m. in Japan. So be there or be square. We're going to be yapping about stuff. And that's that. Please stay well. Be healthy.
Stay hydrated. Next week, we will see you for our season 2 preview with our friends over at Stardust Records. So stay tuned for that. It is a very good one. But until then, everybody, thank you again for listening, and may the Force be with you always.
Bye.